Hey everybody, welcome back. Today's video is going to be a little different, not going to be a full design tutorial, but I'm going to focus on something also very relevant and specific to web design in general, and that's unit values for different font sizes in web design. So this is something that could be a little tricky, knowing which unit to use. There's pixels, there's percentages, there's M's and REMS and viewport width sizes, and it was a little confusing to me at first, and sometimes it still can be, but I'm just going to go through all of them individually and show you how they work. And I made little Pixar cards here to stay on our brand here. So it's a little bit of a fun interaction, so let's take a look at those together. So starting off here, we've got pixels. So pixels is probably the most common, the most basic. You're all familiar with it. This is when the font is pixel size. So here we have our font set to 24 pixels, and they usually work very nicely. They just don't scale with different screen sizes. So as I resize our browser screen, the font size will stay the same there, which, is fine. You could just adjust it manually with different screen sizes. I could just lower this down when we're on the tablets, and when we're on this size, if I want to make it even smaller, I can just individually change it each time. And then when you preview this, it will scale as you kind of adjust the screen sizes. It'll just absorb whatever pixel size you're setting. And you know what? That works a lot of the time, so that is always an option. One other thing about pixels is that the line height doesn't scale accordingly. So here we've got our paragraph, and it's at 20 pixels right now. If I change this and make it double that, 40, you'll see how the letters kind of tighten and condense on top of each other. That's because our line height won't scale accordingly. You could just play around with it and set a line height to whatever you'd like, or you could just do a unitless option, which is usually about 1.4 followed by a dash. When you press enter, and doing this allows the line height to be set to 1.4 times whatever the default font size is. And this allows some breathing room on the top and the bottom there. So 1.4 is usually good, but you just have to scale it accordingly to whatever kind of container it's in. Next, let's take a look at M's. So M itself was originally based on the width of the typeface capital letter M. So it's phonetic EM just for the letter M. So everything was based on how wide the letter M was. Now, basically, you can think of M's as looking to the parent element to determine how wide something should be. So if there is a font size set on the closest parent, so let's see here. So we've got our paragraph, and right now it's at 27 pixels. If I just change this to 1M, so right now 1M, it's looking to the topmost parent, and I believe that is the body. So the body paragraph, if we go to our bodies, and right now 14 pixels is trickling down through most of these elements. So right now 1M doesn't have any other parents besides the body, so it's absorbing 14 pixels. So 1M equals 14 pixels in this case. But if we want to change this paragraph directly, I can go to the text div, which is the parent of the paragraph, and if I change this to 24, now 1M equals 24 pixels. So 1M will always equal 24 in this case. But if I change it to 2M, now it'll be 48 pixels high. And 3M, etc., it'll just multiply itself times whatever the parent's font size is. So just be conscious of that. Sometimes you can change it based on the body's font size, but you have a little more control if you affect the parent div itself directly. So M's, they look to the font size of the nearest parent element and absorb that quantity. 1M is equal to whatever the parent's font size is. Now we have REMS. So REMS stands for root element. It refers to the root element's font size. So in Webflow, we actually don't use REMS. It's not one of the values that are allowed, but basically it would be like looking to the body's root size, because that is kind of the root element of the document. But normally in web design, REM is referring to the HTML font size, so whatever is set in the HTML. If you're on a desktop or a browser, usually this is 16. So if you just go to in Chrome here anyway, if you go to the font size that's set defaultly, you'll see here it's at 16 pixels. So by setting something to 1 rem, you would be setting it to 16 pixels, or whatever the default HTML root value is. So in most browsers it's 16, but if say somebody was visually impaired and they wanted to have a larger size, they would have their base setting at maybe 30. So then 1 rem would be 30 pixels in that case, because it's looking to the root element. Again, not something used in Webflow specifically, but if you're working in general web design and want to make sure you're sticking to the user's sort of web browser preferences, you can go for REMS. Percentages. So percents are a little similar to M values in that they look to the parent's element's size and then become a percentage of that size. So in this case here, we've got our percent. Right now it's at 27 pixels. So if I change this to 27%, right now I think the body's font size was 14 pixels. So right now it's 27% of 14 pixels. But let's direct its parent directly. So now, actually we have 12 pixels here set on the parent. Great. If I make this 24 pixels, now I can make this 50%. So right now the paragraph text is 50% of the 24 pixels that's set on its parent, which would make it 12 pixel font, right? So if I wanted to make this 100%, it's basically the same as setting 24 pixels. I can make this 200% and it would be 48 pixels high. Again, if that for some reason is something that works for you in that case, based on a div your text is living in or something, great. Percentage will absorb the parent element size and become the percentage of whatever that font is set as. Next we have VW. So VW stands for viewport width, and when your text is set to a viewport width value, it will absorb a percentage of whatever the viewport's width is. Makes sense. So right now we have our paragraph selected. If I just put this to 1 VW, right now it is 1% of the viewport's width. 1 is equal to 1%. So if I were to preview this and then scale our browser, you'll see how it changes size based on the viewport's width. So as the viewport gets smaller, the percentage of the text size gets smaller as well. So this is something that's used pretty often and allows a lot of flexibility when you're doing different screen sizes for different mobile views and things. And that is definitely something you can get to work, but you'll see here on smaller sizes it gets very tiny. So you would just have to kind of set some different breakpoints and make sure that it's not impossible to read. So if I go here, it was 1 VW on desktop, but maybe on tablets we want it to be 2 VW or even 5 VW. And then you might have to affect the line height as you go to make sure everything stays proportional and is readable. VW is actually very useful. You just have to track it as you move through different sizes and make sure your divs are kind of set the same size too, because sometimes it'll bleed out of the boundaries if the div isn't scaling as well. VW, viewport width, font size will scale accordingly based on the viewport size. 1 VW equals 1% of the viewport width. Lots of flexibility, great when you're scaling down to different viewport sizes. Lastly, we have CH, and that stands for character. So it's referring to the font character itself, specifically the 0 within a font character. And what that means is, right now we have Arial as our font, and when I set a max width, let's say, to 50 CH, right now this paragraph will only ever be 50 zeros wide within the Arial font. So what I mean by that is, if I add a new line here, and I type the letter 0, that's what CH is based on, the letter 0, number 0, letter, number, you get it, 0, within Arial. So as soon as you hit 60, it'll be forced to go onto a different line. But if I made this 10 CH, you'll see now it'll only ever be as wide as 10 zeros within that font. So this is just like setting a max width property. If you want to keep it relevant to the font size that you're working with, this is an option. You could always just do a pixel value or percentages as well. So CH, character width, is a unit that refers to the 0 within that font that you're using, and you usually use it with max width, so you're setting a width on your paragraph element itself. So there you go, just a quick video on some different font units. Sometimes they were tricky to me in the past, but this was definitely a good refresher for me to remember the different values. At the end of the day, pixels is probably your safest bet. It's most commonly used, and you can still adjust it on different screen sizes. You'll just have to manually change it and find which one looks pleasing to your design. Viewport width is probably the other one that I use most often, if I am maybe in like a hero section of a website, so it scales if it's a larger font size to begin with. That way it's never massive, it's never too small. But pixels and maybe sometimes viewport I would say and recommend at the end of the day. But depending on what you're building and what you're designing, you might have to play around and use some other sizes. So it's really up to you at the end of the day. There's no right or wrong. As long as it scales nicely and looks nice and is accessible to different readers and things, go for it. So I hope you got something out of this. If you did, give me a like and a subscribe. Always appreciate it, and stick around for the next one.